So in the last podcast, we talked about the educational system in the US, and we looked a bit closer into the secondary school system. And in this video today, I want to look a bit more into like the tertiary education, and maybe just as a summary from last week's podcast, maybe I repeated and you tell me if I got everything correctly. So in terms of how you actually get to university, you said it's a combination of your high school grades, then one of the standardized tests like either the SAT or the ACT, and it is also your extracurricular activities. So did I understand that correctly?
That is correct. So it's a comprehensive kind of source of information that schools use to determine if they want to accept a student.
And then I would have a question regarding that, and I don't know if you can answer that. But so what do you think? Like if I look at that, let's say you have two students, right? So one student, let's say, has okay grades from high school, has an okay test score, and has done a lot of extracurricular activities, maybe played in the school band or played a sport or was doing a lot of community work or something, or worked in projects outside of school. And then you have a student who has outstanding high school grades and a very good test score, but has done very little or nothing extracurricularly. Do you think like that this makes a difference, that a university, because I mean, this is just an assumption from my part, but for example, the reason why I'm asking is that in the German university system, what I told you already, they would definitely take student B, the one who has the best test score grades or the best grades from high school and the highest test scores, and like the personal aspects about yourself or what you've done outside of school doesn't matter at all. So I'm wondering if that really matters to that extent for for getting into a university.
Well, I think in general, yes, it does matter, because these pieces of data, right? A student's grade point average, their test scores, schools want to be able to say, we're accepting the best incoming class of students this year based on their GPA or based on their test scores. And so, yes, it does make a difference. But at the end of the day, the schools also want to accept students that are going to be successful, right? That are going to end up graduating, because graduation rates are also a piece of data that schools and the government actually looks at to determine how successful the school is. Okay, so I think it is important that students have good grades and score well on the standardized tests. But there's more to that when it comes to university and becoming a more well-rounded, accomplished individual by the time you graduate. Because if you only and once you get into university, if you only spend your time studying in the library and you're not participating in extracurricular activities at the university, then the idea is, maybe you'll walk out and you'll graduate with really good grades, but are you ready for the world that awaits you? Based on that.
So the American educational system sees a connection there, right? So they see a connection between how well-rounded the person is, and it's not just the grades, and what they can actually achieve, professionally, maybe personally, and later in their life, right? Is that correct?
Well, for sure, because a part of university is developing well-adjusted people, right? People that have a good temperament, right? That can adjust to changing situations. And if you only study and you have really good grades, that's not really indicative of your ability to be able to be well-adjusted when it comes to surviving in the larger world and larger society. So universities want to accept students that are going to participate, in the university community, because that may be indicative, for life after university.
Interesting, because like I said, from my experience of studying in the US and Germany, I think there's a big difference there in kind of, how much that actually matters, because I think like the focus, that might also be in other countries, that the focus on like the academic part of like school and the university experience is much more important than anything else. And I don't really see that from when I studied in Germany, that there was something in the place that would develop you as a more well-rounded person or something. Yes, we have, extracurricular activities, but I think the difference that I've already noticed and picked up on, like in our last podcast about secondary schools, that there's a huge difference in, we might have one thing or the other as well, but how it's actually viewed and perceived and the importance it has in the educational system as a whole. So that was interesting to see. My next question would be maybe also a little based on like the American films I've seen about this kind of topic, is how important is it for, let's say the average American to actually get to a university, because when you watch like films, they always, also depends of kind of what genre you watch, but they always make a point of, that, the moment the parents know that, that they are expecting a child, that they are saving up for college and stuff. And like, this is like for us in Germany, university is for free in Germany. And that's kind of an interesting concept. So I wanted to ask you about that. How does that, how is this, perceived, and what does it mean to an American, or what does it mean to a family? Maybe also what it meant to you personally.
Well, I think going to university, or being accepted into university, is to some degree a rite of passage, right? You're passing over from being a child to being an adult, and being in control of your own destiny, and charting the path for your future. And so starting from a very young age, and as you said, even at birth, many times parents already start thinking about how they can prepare for that moment when their child will leave the nest, right? Leave the house, go out on their own, and start their own life's journey. And so it's a very significant moment for most students in the United States to be accepted. I remember, in general, when you're in high school, you are advised to apply, for many different schools, many different universities. You may have a favorite, or you may have a couple favorites that you want to get into. So schools that were schools that I didn't know if I qualified for, that were reach schools, but I wanted to try to get into. And then there were safe schools that I felt confident that I would get accepted into based on my grades, my test scores, my extracurricular activities. But I remember when I got my first acceptance letter into a university, I was so excited because I knew that I would be going to university. So I knew that my path forward the door had been opened, right, to my path forward. And then I started getting more acceptance letters, and it's a great feeling as a student, right? Because it's kind of confirmation that all the hard work that you put into high school is paying off, right? And for most students, it's a very exciting moment. Many students keep these acceptance letters.
Do you still have yours?
I think I still have mine at home somewhere. And And to be quite honest with you, many students keep the rejection letters as well, because you get those rejection letters as well, saying you didn't get accepted in. And many students use that as, motivation, right? To, to apply again. So it's a big moment for most students.
Okay, interesting. So are there, students who apply at different universities and are actually not accepted anywhere? Does that happen as well? Or is there always do you always get accepted at one of these universities that you applied for?
Well, it's not guaranteed. So again, all of your grades, test scores, extracurricular activities, everything that you do, sometimes the schools require you write an essay, different things in order to, as a part of the application process. But in general, there's no guarantee. Every student has to apply. But again, your counselor will advise you and say, okay, tell me where you're in a safe choice. Is this a reach? Is this a school? I know you want to get there or you want to go there, but it may be a little bit beyond, where your test scores and your grades, will place you. So you have a conversation about it, and you hopefully apply to a range of schools so that, you do, get accepted into at least one of them, and you have, a place to go. But there's no guarantee that you will get into, to any university.
Okay. I already mentioned that, and I was assuming that, the listeners know this, but compared to Germany, like I said, tertiary education in Germany is more or less for free. Yes, you have to pay a small fee every semester or every year, but that's different in the US, right?
To put it nicely, yes, it's very different.
So how much... Because like I said, in the films, it's always more jokingly, this kind of idea that to save up for college, but how expensive actually is that? Of course, it depends to which university to go to, but if you would, can you say give an average amount that it would probably cost you to do, I don't know, a bachelor's degree and maybe then a master's degree or something?
On different factors. So depending on where you live. So if you go to a college or university in the state where you live, generally it's cheaper than if you go to a college or university that's outside of the state where you live.
Why is that? What is do you know what's the reason behind that?
Well, I don't know the exact reason, but I imagine it's because the universities can, of course, charge a higher rate for students coming outside of the state, because in general, schools want to educate the people in their state, right? They want to create a populous citizenry in their state that is educated and well-informed. And so the idea, and many of these schools are public schools. So I think there has to be an understanding that in the US, we have public schools and private schools. So the public schools, of course, are there for the public of that state and want to educate the public of that state, but they're not necessarily going to turn away students from outside of the state. This is why we have students from other states. We have students from other countries that come to the school, and they're valuable as well. They're assets to the school as well, because they make the school more diverse. But the cost that you pay will be different depending on where you live and where you're coming from. And so generally, if you are going to a public school in the state where you live, it's cheaper than if you go to a school that's outside of the state. Okay. It also depends on the size of the school. It depends on the funding that the school gets from the government. Okay. But when I was going to school, and I can't speak for at this very moment because I haven't been in school now for 10 years, but when I was going to school, it was more or less per semester. It was more or less about $8,000 a semester.
Okay, so how many semesters are there in the year two then, right?
There are 2 semesters in the school year. Yes.
Yeah. So it would be around $16,000 for 1 year of studies.
More or less.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, keep in
yeah.
mind, I went to a school in my state.
Okay.
So that amount is less than if I were going out of state. The other part of it too is many students get assistance from the government because of these costs, right? So not every student comes from a family that was able to save enough money for their child to go to university. And so they get assistance helping to help pay for this tuition cost.
Interesting. And then for a bachelor's degree, you would have to be at university for 4 years, right?
Depends on the field of study, but in general, yes, it's a 4-year.
Okay, because I'm just trying to roughly calculate. So you could say like, I mean, again, that was 10 years ago, but it would be like, you know, if we say, okay, $15,000 a year and you need that for 4 years, you know, that's $60,000 in, you know, debts basically that you have once you're finished with your bachelor's degree, right? And compared to, let's say, someone who studies in Germany who pays 100 euros in fees every semester or something. So that's a huge difference. Maybe this is something that, is interesting from our point of view to understand as well. What does this actually mean for you if you are a student? Let's say you don't come from a wealthy family that, you know, that it's just like, you know, money that you can afford as a household or as a family. But let's say, you know, you're the average American. How do they deal with that? That, you know, even for, let's say, a normal bachelor's degree at maybe an in-state university, you have debts of like $60,000 when you, at the age of, let's say, I don't know, 22 or something, when you leave university. Like, how do you deal with that, you know, and how does it affect, you know, in terms of like finding a job, you know, paying off your debt and stuff? Maybe you can give us an insight there.
So I think in general, when you're 18 or 19 or however old you are when you graduate and you're ready to go to university, it's hard to conceptualize how much money is going to take for you to be able to complete a bachelor's degree. So because you get assistance from, generally, most students get some form of assistance from either the government or private entities, it's very easy in general to get this money to go to school and to get an education. So you don't really conceptualize it so much because you never really had the money to start with, right? It's just basically money that's kind of loaned to you to go to school. You only conceptualize it once you graduate, and then you get that nice letter from the student loan company saying, hey, you know, now it's time to start paying on these loans. And so we as students in the United States or as Americans, it's kind of a cultural thing, right? That you're going to come out of school and you're going to have student loan debt and you're going to have to start paying on it in some kind of way. But it does, I think, make it difficult for you to chart a path forward because depending on the amount of your student loan debt and how much you have to pay back, may determine what type of job you take or what type of jobs you apply for, and what type of career path you go into, because in general, I can't speak on what the average student finishes with in debt, but it's usually tens of thousands of dollars, and when you start paying back these student loans, you have different options. At the current moment, you have different options for paying back student loans. You can pay them back at a standard rate. So the standard rate is you take the total amount of your student loans and you divide it by 10 years. and whatever that comes out to per month, that's what you pay on a monthly basis. Many students can't afford that based on the amount of their student loans. So what they end up doing is going on some kind of income-based repayment plan.
Okay.
So the repayment of your student loans is based on your income, and so your monthly student loan repayment is based on some calculation.
Okay.
That the government does to depend on a discretionary money that you have each month. So they look at your job, they look at how much you're earning, and they do a calculation. They say, okay, you should have this amount of discretionary income left over. We're going to charge you 10% of that. So 10% of that is what your monthly student loan repayment, amount is. So there are options for repaying these student loans, but the problem is, when you go on a repayment plan or income-based repayment plan, these plans are over 20 years or maybe even 30 years, right? So, you graduate at 22 or 23, and let's say you don't even go to graduate school. Let's just say you stop and you start working, for the next 20 years. So until you're in your mid 40s, maybe even early 50s, right? You're still paying on student loans. So this is the issue that becomes very real to a lot of students when they finish I don't want to say not even when they're finished, because to be quite honest with you, even if you don't graduate, you still owe these student loans back. You still have to pay them back, right? So so whenever you stop or end your education, that's when it becomes real, and that's when the reality sets in that now is the time to start repaying these.
Do you think that these, because I'm guessing this is affecting a big number of students that are graduating, do you think this also has an effect on, the economy of a country, that basically you have a huge number of your, future workforce that has a lot of debt and maybe cannot get the job that they would really like to do or be good at, and they have to, go for something maybe that is available at the moment because they cannot afford, sitting around for 2-3 years and then to wait until the perfect job comes up, or, because I'm assuming that, with this kind of debt, that you don't have all this freedom to look for the, the right job, and, maybe you end up having to do something that wasn't really your passion or what you studied or something. Is this something that is like how do you feel about this, or what do you think is this an issue?
So it's definitely, I think, a drag on the economy, because in a prior episode, we talked about the American dream, right? And what it means to achieve the American dream. And when you have student loan debt that you have to factor into that equation, it makes it much more difficult to do things like buy a house, to buy a car, to do adult kind of things, right, in your life. And so this is a hot topic in the United States about what the government should be doing to assist students that have student loan debt, because the idea and the thinking is if students did not have student debt, or if students had a lot less of student debt, then the economy would grow more than what it is currently, because these students would have more buying power, right? They would have much more flexibility in spending their money and being consumers.
Interesting. I mean, I don't know if you can answer this question. I don't know. I couldn't answer it. It's just an assumption I have to make. But why do you think some countries, basically have fees for university and others don't? Like there's a certain number of countries, so you don't have to pay anything if you want to go to university in countries like Germany, Norway, Sweden, Finland, also Czech Republic is another country, France, Belgium, Greece, Spain, and why is this different? What do you think? Because I know, for example, in Germany, if you don't pay, the university needs to get the funding from somewhere, right? And do you think this is actually possible in the US to, where would the money then come from to the universities, you know, to pay for, I don't know, staff or what they are doing?
Well, I think the countries you just listed maybe place a higher value on education than the United States, because, listen, it's free in Germany, and it's free in Spain, it's free in all these other countries that you just mentioned, but somebody's paying for it, right? I mean, you pay for it generally through higher taxes, right? So the country as a whole is contributing towards the education of its people. Whereas in the United States, we live in this county where we are we are controlling destiny, and and where we go in life. And right now, the burden of paying for that education falls on the consumer, right? On our ability to pay that, because, in my opinion, the U.S. hasn't placed a very high value on providing good quality, easily accessible education to its people, because I don't want to say it's done purposefully that the system is the way it is, but it does create a system of winners and losers, right? I mean, it creates a system where the better well off you are, the better well off your family is, the more well off you're going to be in the future, right? Because you can afford these kind of things. Whereas the less well off you are, the lesser your ability is to achieve some level of success when it comes to education in that regard. I think it's because of where the value is placed on education in the U.S. compared to other countries, and why we have to pay, or why the consumer rather has to pay for it, as opposed to the taxpayers in those other countries.